The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Unconventional Therapist. My name is Dave, and I'm joined here with my co-host, Greg C. Hey, what's up, Greg C?
I don't know how I feel about that. Greg C.
Greg C.
Greg C, that's me.
On your Zoom name's always Greg C.
Oh, okay. All right. I see. I didn't even realize that.
I'll call you Greg C word from now on. Is that better?
Oh man. Wow. Oh.
What?
And to think we're about to be talking.
Here is the C word.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. My mind's in the gutter. As always. And to think we're going to be speaking, we're going to be doing some religious talk here a little bit.
C also stands for church.
That's right. C for church. What else can it stand for?
Exactly.
That's
Greg,
right.
how's your week been?
It's been a busy week, It really has been. And it's only Monday.
I know. I always, it's funny. Like I often ask people how their week's going on Mondays and Tuesdays, and then they always say the same thing. And I'm like, I mean, like the week since I talked to you last. Like people take it so literally. I'm like, since the last time I saw it. But yeah, no, I feel you. Today was busy.
It's a busy day, and it's late. We're getting around to this really late, and this is comedian Sebastian Maniscalco, and he has this great opening line, and it says, "The week I had today, that's what I feel like."
Right.
That's what I feel like right now.
And then he does that bit about Chipotle.
Yep.
And Orangina. And his wife thinking everything could be fixed with carnauba wax. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. All right. So listen, Dave, I did that thing where I'm gonna switch gears and start
I had an okay week too, though. It was like, no big deal.
You got upset that I never really.
It's rude.
I'm sorry. Sorry, but you asked me, but in the process of asking me, you did tell me that you've had a very busy day.
It's sad. Too. It's sad that I knew I had to tell you because you weren't going to ask. It's sad to me.
Well, consult one of your Ouija boards about it, Dave, and try to find out what to do.
You mean the one right behind me right there?
That's right.
The new one I just got?
Oh, boy, Dave. The hobbies you have.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? I read a little bit of, a very useful piece of advice the other day. Do you want to, maybe I can fill you in on this?
Sure.
Billionaire. So obviously this guy must be doing something right. Warren Buffett. He was asked to speak at a college, and he gave one of the kids was like, well, do you have any advice on how to live life? And I don't know why they would ask him instead of, but whatever. He's not a guru or anything, but he did give some pretty great advice. And he said, write your obituary, right? Write this thing down, what it's going to look like what all the things you want to accomplish in your life, and then start to reverse engineer it to make it happen. But what if you had the kind of life that was so fantastical and exceptional that you couldn't have made it up even if you tried? For example, a female teenage peasant would request audience with the would-be king of France, prompted, of course, by her chats with Saint Michael the Archangel. The king would see her, and she would be the catalyst in ending the 100 Years' War, transcending medieval gender roles, and leading men into battle with great success. Well, okay, success.
Sneaky SOB. You made me think you were telling me a real story, and then you alluded to our topic. I
did.
This was a planned and rigged scheme that you manipulated me, Greg.
Dave, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I was listening intently until I realized this is your little spiel about what our episode's about that you had planned out. Wow, Greg. Wow.
Well, Dave, last time you called me out on it, and I'm like, I'm going to sneak it in on this guy. I'm going to sneak it in on him. And I did. And we're talking about the teenage Joan of Arc, right? Who would never leave. Oh
my God, she was a teenage witch. Sabrina the Teenage Witch was based on Joan of Arc.
I didn't know that.
I never made that connection until just now. Thank you, Greg C.
It's quite a holy show. It is Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Great show. And when you said the Teenage Witch, I was thinking of that other
Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
No, the one with the top that. You don't know what I'm talking about? I think it's literally
Say it one more time. I just
Have
want to hear you
that.
say that.
Have that.
Not
Oh,
that.
dude.
What?
You don't know what that is? A
No.
teenage witch. We'll post a little. Since you taught me a little tutorial on how to post Instagram things, maybe I'll throw something up there so that everyone can take a look.
Great.
But you don't want to mention anything that. What are your thoughts when Joan of Arc comes to mind? What do you like? What comes to mind for you?
I literally had no idea who Joan of Arc was forever.
This was your idea.
My church was Joan of Arc. So that was like, oh, that's the name of my church. Maybe that'll be an episode.
Oh, you thought this was like Noah's Ark too? Like she had some kind of boat or something?
I actually don't know how I figured out what Joan of Arc was all about. But then when I did figure it out, it was like, oh, all right, that's interesting. And then we were having a conversation a few weeks ago, or maybe it was longer. Time flies. And I was like, it made me think, oh, Joan of Arc might actually tie into a good episode based on whatever our conversation was, which I don't remember to this day. So that's my connection to Joan of Arc.
It's probably had something to do with transgender.
Whoa.
I mean, I don't want to.
That just blew my mind.
And that's probably what it was about, right?
Yeah.
So
possibly, we're often talking about hot societal topics, so it wouldn't surprise me knowing us.
We're on the cusp of conversation. We were having that conversation 10 years ago. Who knows?
Who knows?
All right, let me get into this thing a little bit, right? Let's set the scene a little bit. There's 100 years of war going on. Sure. And I'm not going to go into the history completely of that unless you want to, but it's essentially a war that would go on for 100 years, more than 100 years. And England was trying to claim the right to the French throne, right? And it would go back and forth until Charles VII would retain the throne for France, but not without the help of Joan of Arc.
Right.
And so we can get into her. She's the patron saint of France.
So at the time before she was able to help him do so, right? We have the 100-Year War going on.
Sure.
So Charles, Mr. Charles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Charles, what, the 7th? Is that who we're talking about?
He will be Charles the 7th. You don't really have to get into. He's just Charles for now.
Okay.
Last name Charles.
So they were able to dethrone him, right?
Yes.
Because of accusations of illegitimacy. That basically he wasn't his father's legitimate son, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so because they were able to do that, they were able to dethrone him, and King Henry V was made ruler of both England and France. So there was this within France, though, there was this idea that Charles should be the ruler of France. The French should be ruling France, right? And that plays basically the entire role of where Joan of Arc kind of gets her mission, right? Was to get Charles to return to his throne and be the leader of France.
Yes. That ends up being her mission.
So who was it? Charles VI that they accused of, having illegitimate kids, and
it must have been, right?
Yeah.
See, I don't know how, it's really, that's why I kind of stay away from, we'd really have to do some deep research to understand the ins and outs. You know how this can be with these European kings. They're all cousins and everything else. So, and sometimes their names don't match their actual names, and it's really hard to track this kind of thing.
Yeah. So that was in 1420. It was Prince Charles of, and this is where I'm going to say words that I don't really know how to pronounce. Valas.
Yeah. And that word is actually going to come back. And actually I can just mention now. So there was a witch, the first witch trial was called the witch trials of Valais, which is spelled almost, which it's no, but that's, I think you're trying to, your French pronunciation's okay because there's an A instead of an O in this word that I'm using, but they're so close, and it's so ironic that there was a witch trial with that name, and this ends in a witch. It's weird conspiracy theory stuff.
Yeah.
But before we get into any of that, let's kind of start with the origins or the birth or whatever.
So
of Joan of Arc.
So she was born Jeanne d'Arc, right?
Okay.
Right, Greg? You know what I'm saying? In 1412. So she was the daughter of a tenant farmer in the village of Domremy from northern France.
Yep.
And she was never taught how to read or write. But her mother instilled mucho faith and love into the Catholic Church and its teachings. So she was, a very faith-based, spiritual young lady. But
yeah, and so she's right, but it's also with the backdrop of there's been a war going on for almost like for 100 years, essentially at this point. So it's almost like she's being born into Puritan Massachusetts. It's not fun. War is all they know, and it's kind of a magical place too, right? Yeah. But go ahead.
So, in 1422, the son of Henry V, Henry VI, succeeded him. He was there along with his some French allies, led by Philip the Good, the Duke of Burgundy, and England occupied much of northern France. So, as we were saying, like England kind of has this upper hand, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, within certain populations of the French, they're disgruntled by that.
Yeah,
they're not happy with that. And many in Joan's village were forced to abandon their homes under the threat of invasion. So at the age of 13, Joan begins to hear voices.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Tell me about it. So she believes that God has given her an important mission to save France by expelling the enemies and getting Charles into his position as the rightful king. She claimed that she heard divine voices and saw visions of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is there's all this potential carnage that could be happening in her village. Her village had never been under English control, so she's really connected to France. And she, she's having people, there's death all around in a sense, right? So she also makes this claim too, when she sees these angels and these visions, that she wishes that she could sort of go with them. So that's kind of a sad little state of affairs, right? She's not accompanying them back to heaven, and that's what she wants. Now, let me ask you this.
How do you be happy in these times though? Like, it just feels like your village could be just burned down at any time. There's like, you just feel like I can only imagine what the atmosphere and the environment must have been like with that fear that you have. Like, we live here, yet at any point in time, our homes could be just burned.
Yeah.
We could be uprooted or murdered.
And let's live here for a minute. Let's talk about this for a little bit. It's a good thing. So these auditory and visual hallucinations, well, is it fair for me to call them that? Or is this really divine intervention? I think that's the question here. So are we talking about are we talking about schizophrenia here? Are we talking about grandiose delusion disorder? Or are we talking about God? And does it matter? Like, does it have an effect on how she's viewed? So she's going to go on to do all these brave things, but is she still brave if she's mentally ill, if she doesn't have the capacity to, if she's like, God's telling me if I do this, I'm going to be fine, right? And she really believes that 100%. Is that bravery?
That's a good question. Does she have the ability to be afraid? And
yeah, even does she, in the amygdala, like we're talking like biologically, does she have the capacity to be afraid?
Yeah. Because if she believes these things to be true, and let's say it is mental illness, but like she's dead set, like this is the truth, I have to do these things, but she's able to feel fear and be scared and still do those things, then yes, she's brave.
Absolutely.
If her delusions and mental state do not allow her to have that biological response of fear, then it's just an action without anything preventing it. So how is that brave? It's like, it's just an action.
It's interesting though, isn't it?
It is an interesting concept to think about. Yeah. And is mental illness okay if it only causes you to do good things? Do you have to work on that mental illness, or
we talked about
mental awesomeness?
Right. We talked about how why is schizophrenic constantly selected for throughout history is because it makes awesome people sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe this is schizophrenia, and it's created this awesome legend of this person who's like, I'm hearing angels. Let's go. Let's do this. And it's almost like when we talk about Mother Teresa, can you have 100% faith in anything with no doubt at all without mental illness.
Right.
I feel like you can't, right?
But then there is the downside. I mean, we're kind of like painting it to be this really awesome picture, but ultimately it causes you to do things that put your life at risk.
Right.
And that is what, obviously is the downside of any sort of mental illness that brings on grandiose delusions, is it also makes you engage in risky behavior often. Just like, bipolar, people often don't get help when they're in manic phases because they're euphoric. They feel awesome. They're productive. They're doing great stuff. But then they tell off their family and friends and burn every relationship they had down to the ground, or they engage in some risky behavior that puts their life at jeopardy. Like, that's the stuff, that the downside of all of that great feeling that people have. So, I mean, and ultimately that's what she's doing here by putting herself out there and making these claims. She is putting herself at risk even before she does anything. Just by saying those things, she's putting herself at risk.
But interestingly enough, like, there's a few interesting things happening that people aren't like, this woman is absolutely nuts. So part of her vision is she's saying that Charles VII needs help to ascend the throne of France. And Charles VII is like, they're like, send this message to Charles. And the reason why people are even entertaining this notion that this young female teenager who starts dressing like a man around this time, so this young female transgender teenager should lead armies and be trusted with the future of France. Like, why are people thinking that's okay? Do you have anything on this? Because I have. Well,
she's charismatic, and it's
charismatic,
and it's not just like she's persistent. It takes her 3 times before she's able to convince the local court to allow her up to Prince Charles,
right,
to be able to actually speak to him about it. Like, she has to keep trying. It's not like she just goes up to him and says this thing. But I do know that there's another thing going on at this time, and I don't know if that's what you're going to allude to.
I was going to talk about the prophecy.
Yes.
Do you hear about this?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So like, this prophecy that a marvelous virginal maid would come from the ancient wood to save France. So people are like,
so that's something known and written, right? And you know why that's interesting though, and why that helps. I believe it's Charles. He's actually really into the prophecy at that time. Well, also probably because it really benefits him if it's true. But like, so there's this whole thing going on at the time with like mysticism, and it's really increasing at this time. There's a lot of female mystics claiming to have visions, and actually some people are like, murdered or killed because of like their visions being not good visions. But prophecy and divination are popular at this time, and Charles, is no different from anyone else in like kind of his interest in this. And like I said, I think also because it kind of benefits him if there is any truth to it. So it's like, why not believe in it? It's kind of like her believing. Yeah, it's kind of like her believing those messages. Like, I have to do this. It's nice for her to feel like I have a mission. I have a reason to be here. I'm supposed to help him. I can advance myself while I'm doing it. For him, it's the same. It's like, well, if these things are true, then why not? Let's see this out then and see what happens. I can't lose by letting this girl do this.
Yeah, and what's also really cool about that prophecy? It's attributed to a very specific mystic of the time. Well, not of the time. I guess you would say, like, fictional even, but at the time no one really knew. It was kind of Merlin.
Oh, really?
This is Merlin's prophecy, which is awesome.
Wow.
And it's interesting that they mentioned the virgin stuff. There's a lot of virgin stuff, and it becomes very important to her, and I guess everyone else.
Well, that's purity, right? That's
purity, right?
Yeah. It's like Mother Mary.
So she even has visions of Mary, and Mary says to her, it talks to her about how important staying a virgin is. I mean, that's the whole, like, there's something about remaining a virgin at this time. If you lose that, it's obviously it's all like the patriarchy and men fearing, wanting control, right?
Yeah.
And wanting women for their own or whatever. Like, it's this huge importance on staying a virgin, which is, interesting. We could talk about that forever, and I'm sure we have.
Well,
but
I can imagine it's questioned for multiple reasons. It makes me wonder if things like, and this is a little bit of a sensitive subject, but I wonder if rape's a very common thing at this time. we're talking about like people like invading and like, so for someone to be a virgin
Oh yeah.
is probably, important because they've been able to, that's a virtue to them, but also because of that reason, like it's another element of, I don't know. That's kind of my guess because I was hearing a lot about like kind of the behavior of even like the soldiers, I guess you would say, or whatever, when they're in
Sure, and
combat.
maybe even like maybe that protects her from that, because who wants to be a soldier that rapes Joan of Arc and like ruins the prophecy? Because the prophecy is very specifically claiming that this must be a virgin that's going to save France.
Yeah. So when she's 16, that's when she's finally able to convince the local court that she should, um, basically not have to accept her match for her arranged marriage that her dad was trying to set up with her, and really pursues like trying to convince Charles that this is what I need to do, and this is how I need to get you into your place, right?
Yeah, and she does end up meeting with Charles.
She does.
And he's impressed with her. He's impressed with her intellect. He's impressed with her virginity, and he's he challenges her to reveal some of his secrets, and he wants to test the power of her quote unquote voices in her head, which is what's kind of written down in some places. So some people are really viewing this as, even in the 1400s, is Joan of Arc hearing voices or is this legitimate? Right? It's even a question then. But she reveals some private details of his life that he assumes he didn't tell anyone else. And how did she do that? That's interesting, right? So he impresses her, and he impresses the whole court because you're right, she never learned how to read. She shouldn't be intellectual, but somehow the way she carries herself is really impressive.
Yeah.
And where's that coming from?
That's a great point. Like, where does she learn to be so charismatic? Where does she learn all this information that she has? There's just it almost feels as if there's just an aura or a way to her that makes all this even possible. Like, not to be dark, but we talk about this with serial killers. Like, I remember the conversation we're having about the Dracula killer, for example, and we're like, how does he even get into some of these scenarios and talk people into? And there was like the reporter that he had met at a bar that ended up writing the book about him.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, there's just something about this guy. And
well, no self-doubt.
There's some people who, yes. So I think that's with her. It's that driven, I know what I know, and you have to believe me because you'd be silly not to. I'm going to save you. I'm going to save France. It's just determination, right?
We love confidence. We follow people with confidence.
Yeah.
If someone really, like, they're sure they know what they're doing, you're like, all right, well, I'm not sure about anything. So
it reminds me of the first day I met you. And before I really got to know you, I was like, this guy, I got to follow this guy to success.
Is that that's like very flattering and can't be true.
And then 2 days later, I was like, what the hell did I do?
Oh, he's mentally ill.
He is insane.
He just thinks he knows everything. Okay. Yeah.
So
did it take you long to find that out?
So yeah, she ends up being allowed to go to her mission, right?
Yeah.
I have a few dates here. So May 1428, she goes to, help me out, Greg. Vaucouleurs.
Sure.
An area of individuals loyal to Charles. She's at first rejected by the local magistrate, Robert de Bougecourt, but she persists. She attracts a small band of followers, which, I mean, this is a thing for her, even in life and in death, and who believe her claims to be the virgin who is destined to save France, which, like you said, is a popular prophecy. When he relents, she crops her hair and dresses in men's clothing to make an 11-day journey across enemy territory to Chinon.
Yeah.
Good enough. Which is the site of the Crown Prince's palace. She promises Charles that she would see him crowned. And against the advice of most of his counselors and generals, he grants her request, and she sets off to fend off the siege of Orleans in March of 1429, dressed in white armor and riding a white horse. Do you
How
get more
badass.
pure than that, though?
Oh my God.
Right?
They're screaming virginity. It just said virgin
Yeah,
across the horse.
he
Like,
really
yeah.
did.
But all right. So she legitimately rides, leading the charge and plans a lot of these battles. And she wins a lot. She loses a few, but she wins a lot.
Yeah.
And
She sends a letter to her, a defiant letter to her enemy, and then leads the French assault against them, and it drives the Anglo-Burgundians out and causes them to retreat. So it's a
it
win.
does. And she, even when she's scared, there's all these times like she's like climbing a ladder. You know how this is very medieval. They're climbing ladders and people are like throwing things down on them. Somebody threw a rock down and it hit her helmet and cracked in half, and she keeps going. So, not great, right? If you're already a little having, we're perceiving her as a little bit mentally ill, but
Would you have thrown a rock?
at the screaming teenage virgins running at me, I probably would have thrown a big rock at her. Yeah.
Really?
I mean,
wow.
if I was in the Burgundian
Dude,
side, right?
I would have thrown a tomato.
No. Yeah, that's pretty. That's pretty medieval. Like cabbage or something. That's pretty medieval
no,
too.
something stained the white. You're not getting it.
That's right. That's stainberries. That's what we used to have when we were kids. I wonder if she had her GI Jane moment. It's a very GI Jane. I kept thinking of that. I'm not going to use that 3-word graphic phallic phrase, but it's interesting though, right? It's very cool to think of her riding into battle. This young 16-year-old girl leading these grizzled, war-hardened soldiers. It's really, and it's happening fast, and it's super interesting.
Yeah.
So this, I mean, I don't know how many of these battles you want to get into, but
no, I mean, I think that's like important for people to understand. Like this person not only convinces the prince to allow her to pursue this battle to get him into to be crowned again, but then she actually succeeds.
I know.
And it's just because of confidence.
Just because of confidence, but there is a little section here that I've coined couple of hard truths.
Got it.
And I hope you permit me to say these.
Go ahead.
So she only killed one person with her sword, which the sword actually has an interesting story too. She told Charles that sword is hidden underneath a cathedral, and they like dug right where she said, and they found it, and there was a sword there. That's crazy, right? But again, she only used her sword once, and it was to kill a prostitute because the prostitute was quite the opposite of virgin. And you know how
so she killed the prostitute?
She killed a prostitute just for being a prostitute.
She didn't want prostitutes near her like brigade. I don't know what you would call them.
Well, she didn't want people getting horny because then she's in danger.
Yes. And they actually say, and she'll say this too, but that is a large part of the rationale for even like dressing quote unquote as a man is her own safety. And she does say that in trial, which I'm sure we'll get to. But like, that's true. She wants them all to behave. But I had even heard that like they were all under their best behavior in her presence. Like a lot of them really did seem to treat her with a level of respect, and there was like a lot of funny business from what I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we know that? I don't know for sure, but that's kind of what history has told us.
Well, people are almost, I mean, the very high percentage of people believe for the most part in God, right? At this time. So it's like, why take the risk?
She had to change in front of them. Like, there was a lot of like risk, I guess, considering the time and the way women were viewed at this time and the lack of women these people probably had.
I know. See, like there's a few other things here though. Like she only won the very winnable battles. So the evenly matched or the ones when she was maybe slightly outnumbered, she lost those. So that's kind of lost to history. But that doesn't take away from the fact that she is a young teenage girl with no war experience leading these battles and doing a pretty good job, right? The country starts to rally around her as the savior of France. So that's great for her. But this is going to start to make Charles feel a little weird about this. Like, he wants to be the hero of France, and now she's being seen as the hero of France. And I think that's something that starts to play out as time goes on too.
Yeah.
And we'll see.
Well, and I think that plays a big part of it, like you were saying with Charles, because she starts to get a reputation. It spreads pretty far and wide amongst like the French forces. And she gets a little bit like, I don't know if pushy's the word, but just like she kind of wants to start to continue. Well, I should say she wants to continue to press, right?
She's a little arrogant in a sense.
Yeah, so she was arguing for the French to press and attempt to retake Paris, and I'm sure some of like her directions was starting to get to Charles, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like I almost feel like maybe he was looking at this, and I don't want to say mascot, but something to sort of like something to rally behind. Like she's not really going to lead the troops. Like we're gonna have our generals do that, but I don't know. I feel like something like this is going on behind the scenes. Almost, she's like a symbol of France.
Yeah.
She's not the actual.
She does follow through on her word. So she did want to take Charles to Reims, which I guess is like a popular place where, like, for coronation, so he could be crowned. She does take him there in July of 1429, and he's coronated as King Charles VII. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but he's crowned. So she does do exactly what she said she was going to do for him.
She really does.
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
So she does, like we said, you're saying like she doesn't win every battle. It looks like they didn't win. Did she win the battle to take Paris? No, they lost that one. So that was one that she was pushing for. So I mean, I guess that doesn't help her case either, though. Like if she's being pushy, but then also isn't able to carry out everything that she's pushing. And he's taking orders, from a teenage girl. Think about the time and the gender roles at this time. It's an interesting thought. So in the spring of 1430, the king ordered Joan to confront a Burgundian assault on Compiègne. In her effort to defend the town and its inhabitants, she's thrown from her horse and left outside the town's gates as they closed. The Burgundians took her captive and brought her amid much fanfare to the castle of Beauvoir, occupied by the English commander at Rouen. I can't say any of these words.
Yeah, no, it's none of that's important. Yeah, she got captured by the English. We could just say, we don't have to say the Burgundians or anything like that. But it's
well, we should say the Burgundians, because that's like obviously very popular in today's society with Burgundian waffles.
It's true. You're right, and I'm sorry. I would have thought it would have been fine just saying the English, but you're right. Let's be more very specific about it. The Duke of Burgundy. She'll be appearing in front of.
We love your waffles.
Yeah, I do. I know you can tell. Carbs are the enemy, but I don't care. So the she's brought to, and these guys hate her, right? I mean, so right away, they've got her. She's tried for heresy, witchcraft,
70 charges.
Magic. Yeah, black magic. Do you know there's difference between black magic and witchcraft?
Of course.
All right. Well, do you want to know it for our listeners? Because of course you know. Witchcraft, black magic is when you control like the spirits. So you have a lot of control. You're so astute with like the dark, passages in these books and everything like that you can control the demons and everything like that. And witchcraft is when you work for them. So it's kind of both. She's also tried for dressing like a man. Guilty as charged on that one, right? So
well, and that's where that argument comes. I have a quote. It is both more seemingly improper to dress like this when surrounded by men than wearing a woman's clothes. While I have been in prison, the English have molested me when I was dressed as a woman. I have done this to defend my modesty. So, I mean, that's a very valid
that's a good point.
Argument.
Yeah.
It sucks that she's being molested in prison.
Jeez, both are bad enough alone. So she tries to escape this hell by summoning her angels as she jumps off a tower, and unfortunately, they didn't catch her. But that's not what the angels are all about, and we know that. So during the trial, she was held.
Did she hurt herself?
She did quite badly. You can't just do that and get. Yeah, no, she was rough shape for a while. But when the trial started, she was held in a standing position for days. So like her neck secured by chains and her wrists and ankles like held out. So she's like that for days. She's tortured in a cage. And like we don't have to get into this right now, but where's Charles during all of this? This is making me very upset.
Well, he intentionally made no attempt to negotiate for her release.
Yeah, it's horrible. So
he's trying to distance himself from her.
He is. And he's like, I got what I could out of her. I'm surprised he's not terrified that he's going to have some kind of divine punishment, but whatever. I guess he didn't really care. So here's Joan at this point. 60 assessors, 60 of these priests. She has to defend. Remember, she has no education. She has to defend her theology to all of these priests.
Yep.
Which is crazy, right? This is very Inquisition before the Inquisition. Is this like the first real witch trial? I don't know.
It feels like it.
Yeah,
it definitely does. And Greg, did you know what the process is called that they had to do to assess her for this?
Oh, for her virginity?
No, for her, like, whether basically they had to figure out if the visions that she's claiming she has come from God or the devil.
Yes. Okay. No, I don't.
It's called oh boy, Discratio Spiritum.
I think you might have conjured something. Don't say that shit around your Ouija board.
Decimate of spirits. So they have to work out whether a few things, if she's a virgin or if she's a virtuous person that she claims she is. Were the visions from God? And if there was ever a sign, like they have to look for a sign. And some are saying the sign was like given at the front of Oleon. I guess I don't completely understand what that is. But anyways, yeah. So that's the process that they had to do to decide whether it was God or the devil.
And so they do decide that yes, she's hearing voices and that's real. Only they're demons, not angels.
Yes.
Not cool.
Yep. You know what's interesting? I heard this, and I'm curious on your thoughts about this. So as she goes along, at first, because I think this is a question less about this trial and everything, and more about just like if this was delusions or if this was something else. When the trial starts, it's she heard voices. As she's questioned, it goes to visions. And then it actually goes to later into being she was visited by Saint Margaret, Saint Catherine, and Saint Michael. So it's almost as if what she experienced evolves over the course of the trial. Does that mean it's possibly not real?
Well, look, there's enough. You know where I'm going to land. There's enough here to sort of. It's not cut and dry. It's not super easy. There's a lot of unexplainable things here. You have to remember, this is a teenage girl. This isn't a teenage girl in America who would have a lot of power. I mean, they made the Beatles famous, right? So this is a teenage girl in medieval Europe, maybe the least amount of power you could possibly have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really. And she was able to sort of become famous. We're having a hard time becoming famous, and we've got the internet. Right? She was able to do this with just her personality, her visions, which were sometimes true. She leads men and wins, I don't know, 80% of the time, which is pretty damn good. I don't know. There's still, and we're still talking about her 600 years later. Is it just an awesome story? Yeah. And if it's, I don't know, it's almost like if it's mental, if it's schizophrenia or we're just calling it something. We're just calling the fact that she's seeing and hearing things, we're giving it a name as if like we're somehow better, but like does that take away from she is really seeing these things?
Yeah.
Right. And they are really making things happen for her,
right?
Whether it's some kind of imbalance in where her the right amount of neurotransmitters in the in the wrong places in her brain, if that's the explanation, fine, but like what's doing that? Who chooses, who that's going to happen to? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I guess I don't know.
Sounds like you don't know.
It sounds, yeah, you're right. Once again, I don't know.
Greg,
And they're,
what ends up happening over time though, with all this pressure they're putting on her, the questioning? I mean, that's a lot.
She doesn't break, does she? She breaks a
Yes,
little.
she breaks. And she breaks in 1431. She's a year in captivity at the threat of death. She relents and signs a confession denying that she ever received divine guidance. So she decides to go in the direction of, I kind of have to do this because they're going to put me to death if I don't, and maybe I'll be let free if I say this. Several days later, though, she then defies the orders again.
That's right.
She puts on men's clothing, and the authorities pronounce her death sentence at this time.
Yeah, so she kind of didn't. She had a little lapse, which, geez, can you imagine standing up for 3 days straight?
Well, what's funny is, like, I think I heard somebody talking about this, why they think this might have happened, and I think it makes a lot of sense. There's an idea that maybe she thought that if I just agree to this, they'll let me go, or like this will end, and it didn't just end. They actually villainized her worse after that. So there you go. Like, it's that it's like, why bother doing this if I'm still going to be tortured and villainized? So
might as well stand by it.
Exactly.
Well, it's like John Proctor in The Crucible, and that's a fictional character. Like, at first he's like, yeah, I'm gonna throw in the towel and just say, yeah, fine, whatever, you guys are right. Just because, it doesn't matter what I think. If they're gonna let me live, fine, whatever. But then you kind of realize, well, I don't want to give up my name and everything I sort of stood for. And I think that's where she was like, you know what, forget this.
Yeah.
And
she has to be true to herself. And I think, you know what? It's even with Mother Teresa, like we talked about.
Yep.
There's moments of your faith being questioned, or you make a choice that maybe goes against that driven idea that you've had. And so why would Joan of Arc be any different? We are not perfect creatures. Yeah. She deserves that same amount of empathy and respect that we were able to give to Mother Teresa, who is not threatened, and like her life's not being threatened and held in captivity for a full year. So
interestingly, that like her kind of folding just for a minute, do you know what that suggests though? Sound judgment. Something to think about there.
Yeah.
Right? So she's kind of got her wits about her.
Wow. Dang, Greg.
Damn.
You really don't believe. Wow.
No, I really do believe.
You believe that this was all a fraud?
No, I don't. No, I don't. That's the opposite.
Conclusion is Greg C.
Even the people, even the Burgundians, excuse me, Dave, that when she was in trial in front of these people, at first it's public that they're like, yeah, like let's do this. And then as the trial goes on, she gains support. It's like, remember in Rocky IV where like he starts to win the Russian crowd? It's like, well, that's what's going on here. And then they make the rest of the trial private. So, eventually, I guess we're going a long way to say, eventually she's sentenced to burn. So, and I think she would be the first woman. I think she'd be the first witch burned at the stake in Europe. I think.
I don't know that fact. The morning of May 30th, 1431, at the age of 19, Joan is taken to an old marketplace and burned at the stake. A life no longer.
You just did that real good. That was nice. Did you know that some people saw the word Jesus in the smoke?
Yeah. It's like in that scene in The Lion King where there's like that Easter egg where they're at the ledge and then the leaves blow and it spells out the word sex.
Yeah, it's different than that though. It's a little different than that. Is it kind of like if you start The Wizard of Oz and Dark Side of the Moon at the same time, like they run together. Like there's all lots of cool
I tried that and I couldn't do it. I couldn't get it to work.
I'm sorry, Dave. That sounds like a waste of time. But that's and also, so there's not just that. They couldn't get all of her body to burn. They had to light it 3 times. So there's a little biblical reference there, right? The number 3. Yeah. So that's something. And what I don't know what that means exactly, but that's interesting. Where do we go from here?
Can I just give a little overview of Afterlife?
Please.
All right. So her fame only increased after her death.
Mm-hmm.
20 years later, a new trial was ordered by Charles VII, and her name was cleared. So he finally like did the right thing, I think. Joan attained a mythic stature, inspired number of works of art and literature over centuries, and inspired even a classic silent film called The Passion of Joan of Arc. In 1909, Joan of Arc was beatified in the famous Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris by Pope Pius X. Beatification, if you guys don't remember, we did say that in another episode, which I'm trying to remember what it is, but it's the step right before sainthood. When you beatify someone, the church is basically proclaiming that the person in question is definitely in heaven and definitely able to plead to God on your behalf if you pray to him, or them, I should say. So that's kind of interesting in 1909. It took that long, but also at least that it happened. Very side note, I stumbled across, well, I shouldn't say but we stumbled across a portrait of what looks like a pope the other day before I did this research, and I'm pretty sure it was Pope Pius the 10th, just randomly. So because I looked it up, and he looked exactly like the pictures I found online, and then I look at this, and I'm like, weird tie-in to have that happen. Like it was like 2 days later, I see that Pope Pius the 10th. I never even thought about Pope Pius the 10th.
Don't they kind of all look kind of the same? Though?
He looks like Anthony Hopkins in that movie. I think it was The Pope or something like that. That was like a couple of years ago on Netflix.
Yeah, like Two Popes.
It was like
something like
the Oscar movie. He looks like Pope Pius the 10th actually. Pope Benedict the 15th canonized her in 1920. So that's kind of like her.
Do you know what her miracle was?
Yeah.
It's not great.
It was
because to be a saint, you have to have completed a miracle.
Her miracle was. Why do I feel like I know this? I don't know it. Go ahead, Greg.
It was a baby. See, she brought a baby back
to life.
But it
was only
yawned 3 times and died again.
Oh crap! I'm glad he didn't that fully.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, I knew that. I knew that. Yawned 3 times and then went.
Yeah, so not the best of miracles.
Went back to eternal sleep. That sucks.
Yeah, I mean, that's just terrible, actually. So it's funny that you mentioned something very interesting there. So there's a lot of crap movies around this, like the Lily
I read your note about that, and I started to watch the one with Mila Djokovic.
Yeah.
And it's not. I just got through. I'm in like the first half. It's not bad.
Well, listen. If you learned the story of Joan of Arc first, you would think it's bad because one of the critics says, "I now know less about Joan of Arc than I did before I started watching this movie."
Did you watch it?
I did. Yeah, I did.
And you really didn't feel like it?
I didn't like it, and the Lily Sobieski one was even worse. But what's important here, that one that you did mention, the Passion of Joan of Arc, it has a very interesting history. It was burned twice. And the third final copy was found by a custodian, and that's what we have left as the copy. It's a silent film, so that's interesting. So Joan of Arc herself had to be burned 3 times. This film was almost burned 3 times.
Yeah,
and this is considered to be one of the most influential films of all time.
Interesting,
like a really interesting history of it, and apparently. Like I didn't watch it, but 98% in Rotten Tomatoes, so that's pretty good. And it's got a very strong following. I think you should
rewatch the Joan of Arc with Mila Jovovich.
Right.
I don't think it was as bad as from what I've seen so far.
I'll watch that. You watch the Lily Sobieski one.
I will. The Passion of Joan of Arc being a silent film. I had a funny story. So I went to go see the Passion of Jesus Christ, which the audience was very silent, and that movie experience was crazy because there were some very diehard Catholics in there who were like clapping at certain parts and crying. But I took an individual who is deaf, part of the deaf and hard of hearing community, and he's deaf, and he wanted to see it. So it's like a 3-hour and 30-minute movie. It's super long. I had to signed to him like he also has intellectual disabilities, but very bright individual. But I had to sign what was going on throughout the whole movie. It was very, very long and tiring, but the best part was it's like a dead silent part, and he like burped really loud, and he's deaf, so he didn't get like nobody would stop. And then like I just look at him, he looks at me, I'm like, oh my god. He looks at me, he goes, what? I'm like, nothing. Don't worry about it, too.
Don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because like that movie had a lot of protesting because of the light it showed. It kind of made Jewish people look bad.
Sure. And Mel Gibson was like, who cares?
Yeah, this movie was protested because it made British people look bad.
Oh.
Because the way they were treating
wow, look at that.
Yeah,
2 weeks in a row with us,
and it's both passion of the whatever.
Yeah,
so
2 weeks in a row with us in the rough British
the
portraits,
Brits.
Right?
I mean, we got a lot of listeners out there.
we actually did have someone from Britain listen to the last week's episode. We had like a new there's a thing on our app that tells us when we have new locations. There was one in Britain. That was cool.
Oh, okay.
Interesting quote, or not quote, thought. At one point, Joan of Arc actually said, I've got 1 year to do this, which kind of alludes to the idea that maybe she knew she was going to die.
Wow.
Or that she had limited time on this earth.
She was like, no, I start high school next year.
So, like a lot of stuff going on. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
That's super interesting. It is. Really. She is an interesting little... And plus, remember Bill and Ted? She's very interesting. She's very... You can imagine that she's very... like pious and very like intense, right? Yeah. Always praying. It's intense. I think I would like her.
The other thing was like for the courts, like we were talking about like witchcraft and like them, how they're attacking her. They're not attacking her because like I heard someone reflect this and I think it's very accurate. Like they're not really attacking her because of her gender. They're not really attacking her because she's saying she hears voices. They're attacking her because of what the voices are saying for her to do, right? So it's interesting. Like they don't give a shit about Joan of Arc. They don't care about her mission from God. They don't care if she really is getting a message from God or the devil. They care that her message threatens them.
And it's working.
And it's working. If it didn't threaten them and if it didn't threaten them by getting also a following and other people saying like, yeah, that's right, this would be null and void, right?
Yeah. And why isn't Charles VII the most hated person in French history?
It's a great question. Do you think he did, he came back 20 years later to clear her name because he felt guilty? Or do you think it was because everybody still really rooted for her and he knew it would make him look good?
Yeah, she's a martyr. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
I mean, she's held in the high regard of the French people forever because of that. Now, if she had gotten like old and kind of like miserable and mean, then people would have been like, Joan of Arc, I don't know. But because things happened the way it did, she's a legend.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a legendary life. And like, we had to poke holes in it. We had to kind of like shine a light on both sides of it. But push comes to shove. This person led armies of men, spoke with the king, a peasant. A peasant. Crazy. It just doesn't happen. It's wild. And there's also this one little other thing. We didn't talk much about the gender thing. And I think in her mind, she said to herself, like, God told me to dress like a man. And I think that's all that's really saying is like something inside of her told her she was a man. And I think that's okay. Right? She just felt more masculine. She identified more with like masculine, I don't know, things. And
if what she said about the clothing was true, I don't know that gender is really a question. It's just
you may be right.
I am the one who has to do this, and I think that's a really important message, because
whatever it takes, right?
Whatever it takes, and it could be anybody. And in that time, it sounds like while that was very much against the customary, it still was like with everything going on with prophecy, with the mystics, like we were saying, like maybe it's not that far-fetched to believe that could be true. Also along this line of a woman disguised as a man to be able to engage in fight. There was a couple of other names I wanted to throw out. So you mentioned this last week when we were talking about the subject, but Mulan, which, obviously there's a Disney cartoon and they made a real life version of it. I had never actually seen it. So this weekend, I watched Mulan for the first time. And I was like, oh, all right. Yeah, totally is this story minus the messages from God, right?
Right.
It's a
based on a true story?
No.
Okay.
Not there is no actual confirmation that is actually based on a true story. But it's, what true story it could be related to is one that's connected to me. So this is a distant cousin of mine. Her name is Deborah Sampson. In 1782, during the Revolutionary War, she disguised herself as a man named Robert Shirtleff and joined the 4th Massachusetts Regiment. I have her book right here, and it's Deborah Sampson, the girl who went to war. And she
oh my God, that's so awesome.
There is a statue of her at the library in, oh geez, I wish I could remember where exactly it is. Somewhere in Massachusetts. I think it's like Plimpton, or it's like more inland, away from Plymouth, but it's up by Plymouth.
Oh yeah, Plimpton, Massachusetts.
Good old Plimpton, Massachusetts. Something. It begins with a P, guys.
Yeah,
look it up in a book, everyone.
That
research for once.
It's so the less densely populated in the 1700s, obviously, that somebody was like, Debbie, right? And she's like, it's Robert. It's Robert.
Well, it's with her, she was discovered because they saw that she was wearing the the thing to tape down the breasts. So someone saw that and informed someone. She was actually given a letter that she had to deliver to a commander or something like that. I can't remember exactly who it was to. Yeah. She basically knew the letter was probably outing her.
Yeah.
But had to deliver it anyway. And,
Oh, man.
So
awesome story, though. It's so badass. I love that. I love that story. You believe in something so fully that you'll do anything to kind of be a part of it.
She basically dreamed of fighting in the war, which is what drove her. So, it's a very interesting conversation, and also feels so old fashioned because today, obviously, men and women and any gender or non-gender can enlist, right? So,
right,
I mean, it feels very old fashioned for us to even limit people from enlisting.
I know. I just love that whole idea. I believe in this so deeply. This is my purpose, and I'm a woman. But women, most people would leave it there. Well, women can't do this. Well, then I'll be a man.
Yeah.
Crazy bravery.
Yep.
Really cool.
Yeah. Interesting topic. I don't think it's another one where I don't think you land on an answer. Is she suffering from mental illness? Is she really getting messages of God?
Does it matter?
And does it matter? It is ultimately, it's a question of your own faith and your own beliefs. If she, like I said, if she is suffering from mental illness, but her mental illness is only telling her to do good things, and she achieves the status and martyrism that she achieves, then you know what? Sign me up for that mental illness.
I know, and it's what are you going to say? Look how crazy that person is. They set out to do everything they wanted to do, and everyone else told them it was impossible. Right, but they did it anyway. That's incredible.
And you could say oh, but she died. She was burned. But yeah, you know what her alternative was? Waiting in her village for them to pillage it, and and to basically be homeless. Possibly murdered anyway.
That's the epitome of
no better.
That's the epitome of not why me, what now?
Exactly.
You're gonna suffer anyways. Which kind of suffering do you want? You get to. It's so empowering. I'll choose the kind of suffering that I do.
Yep.
It's very cool.
Very cool. I'm kind of glad we did this. And you know what I forgot?
No.
We did actually pick this for a real reason.
Okay.
It's Women's History Month.
That's right.
That's why we picked this. I at the start, I was trying to remember, like, was this for a reason? And then I'm like, now I remember. It's Women's History Month. That's why we picked this one. Because I remember we had a conversation about 2 potential topics, landed on this. Glad we did. I know a little bit better. I don't know. I found it to be a pretty fun and interesting topic. I don't know if fun.
Look, it's a fascinating story. It really is. It's the reason why we're talking about it 600 years later. So
yeah, and I
really
feel like a
cool
better
stuff.
person for knowing the story. Now I actually can say I know about it. I don't.
Yeah, if you have to say Joan of Arc, you just jump right in there and get in it.
Yeah.
Did you say that you went to a church, Joan of Arc Church?
Yeah, St. Joan of Arc is right up the road. That's where
is that for real?
Got my communion, my everything else they make you do.
You've got some old, like, blue blood New England in you, huh? I mean, like, you've got relatives in the Revolutionary War.
I guess so, right?
Wow, we came over not that long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, what do you want to do? I'm sorry, I'm an immigrant compared to you. Basically,
so
what are you gonna...
and so far, I've had a relative show up in like 3 episodes.
Yeah.
There was
we don't allow any of my relatives in, except maybe the blood Countess Bathory from Hungary.
Yeah, maybe. You got to do your lineage to that one. So there was this one. There was the one.
Gypsies.
Yeah, the ghost testimony one. Yeah. And then I'm almost positive and we've mentioned Lizzie Borden on this, but I'm almost positive I have lineage to Lizzie Borden too. So.
Well, that you saying that makes me say, why haven't we done Lizzie Borden?
Yeah. It's got to find the angle,
the psychological angle.
We'll get there. So everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. We need a favor from you. We need it bad. Oh boy. We need you to make sure you have left a rating or review right after this episode. Don't even put your phone down. Don't, if you're driving, I don't even care. Pull over right now. Don't even pull over. Just do not pull over. I'm just kidding. Pull over and rate and review because we need your help. We need to continue to spread the gospel of Greg and Dave. And we need it really bad because you know what? Greg is about to quit.
I'm not about to quit.
I'm just kidding. Sometimes I think his head's going to explode if we don't get more ratings and reviews. But no, I'm just kidding. We appreciate people reaching out. We appreciate feedback. We just kind of are always driven out of curiosity to hear if people are connecting to us, if people like the topics, if people like hearing our thoughts. So it is a pleasure to always see the ratings and reviews. But ultimately, it's the thing that, it's that guilty thing that we have to ask for because it is what allows us to be presented to the wider audience. It has to do with algorithms and I don't know what else. But it just is what it is. So if you can do that favor for us, we'll be gratefully appreciative. There's also a support the podcast page through Buzzsprout. There's subscriptions on there. We are going to get some cool merch, maybe some stickers to start off with. Send those out to our subscribers. Minimal subscription fees on there. Just whatever people want to pitch in to help us make this a great show. And you can get the link for that in our Instagram bio. And that's about it, I guess. Next week will be sort of an Easter episode in our own twisted way. So I hope you appreciate that. And then that's about it. You got anything else, Greg?
I think that's it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next week. Have yourself a nice little
Christmas.
Nice little Easter. All right. Have a good one.